Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm Shane McDonald and I'm the President of VicTESOL, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today to our webinar titled Teaching EAL Learners Online Using Video Conferencing. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend this acknowledgement to traditional owners and elders, both past, present and emerging, on the country on which you're joining the webinar also. And in doing so, I'd like to acknowledge the rich lessons that we as educators can learn from Aboriginal people who've created and maintained a link through language that has lasted for many thousands of years. So it's my great pleasure today to welcome you here. Our presenters are from the virtual EAL New Arrivals program of the Victorian School of Languages. And I'm going to introduce each of them now, and perhaps that you could wave and so they know who you are. We've got Victoria Butterfield. We've got Voula MacKenzie. We've got Heena Sharma and Panayiota. Today's webinar is about the challenges of teaching. And we're all facing a number of challenges at the moment, given what's facing us with the COVID-19 crisis. We're faced with many new and unexpected challenges in our work and our lives more broadly. And as teachers, we need to find out new ways and think of new ways to engage our learners. We need to stay connected, and we need to feel what we and they are doing is worthwhile. However, one of the things that's been coming up in lots of discussions recently is the fact that we perhaps need to be careful not to try and do everything online that we would do face-to-face, because they're not the same kind of medium. And we need to remember that things probably take a little bit longer online than they would, as we would normally do them face-to-face. So the aim of our session today, and with our experts in online learning, is to provide some practical strategies to help you with teaching online. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to our presenters. We're going to hear from Victoria, who's going to give a presentation, followed by an opportunity to respond to your questions in the Q&A section of this webinar. So welcome again, and I'm looking forward to the presentation as much as I think you are.
Thank you, Shem. So hello and welcome to this webinar on teaching EAL learners online using video conferencing. Appreciate you all attending the webinar, and we hope that you take something of relevance that can help you in your current remote teaching situation. Today we have 4 EAL specialists who work at the Victorian School of Languages in the virtual EAL New Arrivals program. As Shem mentioned, we've got Voula MacKenzie, Heena Sharma, Panayiota and myself, Victoria Butterfield. And we are across Heena and Panayiota are both primary teachers, and Voula and myself are secondary teachers. So hopefully we will be able to help you with some of your questions. The structure of today, okay, so I'd just like to run you through what to expect today. So today there'll be a short presentation, about 20-25 minutes on some strategies for teaching EAL via video conferencing, followed by a Q&A session. And thank you to all of those participants who have already submitted questions. I will try and address some of those questions in the presentation, and then for others, then we will look at them in the Q&A session. And we will start by looking at some of the questions that have already been submitted, and then we will move on after that to looking at any questions that you submit live in the Q&A feature on Zoom. Also, the slide presentation and a list of any resources mentioned will be available for you after the presentation. Okay, so first of all, a little bit of context. What is the virtual EAL New Arrivals program? So the Virtual EAL New Arrivals Program, also known as VNAP, so if I refer to VNAP throughout the presentation, that's what I'm talking about, is a new arrivals program for students who settle in regional Victoria and don't have access to an English language school or centre or a new arrivals program. So we work with students from P to 10, and we do 2 sessions of video conferencing per week with these students while they are at their school, and we are usually on site at the Victorian School of Languages. We use video conferencing, and we usually work with students one-on-one, so it may be different to our current situation, but sometimes we work with small groups of students as well. This is just a picture of some of the schools that we have worked with. The program started in 2015, and as you can see, we've worked with schools all over Victoria. And to be honest, there's more. This hasn't been completely updated of late. And currently we've got over 65 students on our program that we're working with. So on to looking at video conferencing. Many of us are feeling a bit daunted and treading new ground. And to be honest, it's us included, the VNAP team included. We're learning new things because now we are off-site as well, and our students are off-site. So we don't have access to all the technology that we would usually have access to. Usually we use WebEx, but we are also adapting to using all sorts of video conferencing platforms at the moment. And we are also probably facing similar challenges that I imagine you are in terms of language barriers when communicating with families, along with varying computer literacy skills and access to internet and devices and all those sorts of challenges that seem to be cropping up at the moment. It is a challenge, and there are often technical hiccups. Things don't always go smoothly. Even when we're on site and our students are on site, things don't always go smoothly. So that's okay. I think that's the nature of the beast, teaching via video conferencing, and persistence and patience are 2 important things that we always try and remind ourselves of when things are not quite working. However, it can also work really well. And I'd like to show you a video of a student that was in the program. This is towards the end of her time in our program, and this is just answering the question, how do you feel about learning through video conferencing? And I might just have to stop sharing and then share again so the sound works. Apologies. Okay, hopefully the sound works okay with this one. Over.
I think it's alright with me, because I think it will be the same if you come to my school and teach me in the class, or learning TV and stuff, because it's still the same, because we're learning to helping with my English. And I think it's good to other people who's far away and who's in the other side of Australia. They can just learn from TV, and that will help them.
Okay. All right, great answer. Thanks, Chia.
So I really like that video because when she says it's just like you're in the classroom with me, it would be that it's the same. And I think that's really important to remember. A lot of the things that we as teachers do in the classroom, they're transferable to an online platform, to video conferencing. Sometimes it takes tweaking or it takes a bit of creative thinking on our part, but we can make our lessons really interactive online as well. And here's an example of an interactive science lesson. So this is Panayiota teaching a lesson about floating and sinking and doing a science experiment with the student. So all that's really needed is a container of water and some household objects. And you can do it from your end and you can show the student, and then you could ask the student as a follow-up activity to get a bowl of water, container of water, collect some household objects and have a go. And then when you meet back again, then you can talk about what objects did you have, what happened. So it can be a really interactive experience for the student and very language rich as well. Okay, so a little bit about video conferencing platforms. Now, there's many online platforms, and from what I've saw from those of participants who have registered said, the main ones you seem to be using are WebEx, Microsoft Teams and Zoom. Now, none of us are experts in the technical side of things. We have many problems regularly with the technical side of things, but we're EAL experts, so we're looking at teaching through these platforms as opposed to the technical side of using the platform. However, I would recommend looking up online. All of them have tutorials on how to use them, and a lot of also just put up tutorials about teaching using them based on the current situation. I'm pretty sure I saw one on Zoom the other day when I was looking. If you're not sure how to use a particular platform, look it up, do the tutorial, try your IT technician at school, they might be helpful, or other colleagues. All right, sharing screens. Most video conferencing platforms will allow you to share your screen. I find switching between screen share and a full view where they can see my face as opposed to my screen is really helpful, and it keeps students engaged. Oh, sorry. It keeps students engaged, helps to maintain student engagement if they can see the change. Obviously, if you're referring to the document, you need to continue sharing the screen. It's also always really good when you do change to sharing a screen to check that students can see it, that you've shared it and students can see it. That's really helpful. It's happened many times where I've shared my screen and I've thought that students can see it when actually nothing's changed for them, and they don't realise they're supposed to be seeing something different, or if they realise, they don't tell me. And so it's always good just to check, to ask them what they can see. Students don't need to share their screen. You may have some students who are really good with computers and are able to do that easily, but I find even in that case it can be quite distracting for the student and takes away from the language learning as opposed to the and while they're focused on the computer. All right, here's another picture and an example of sharing a screen. Here you can see Heena teaching Hand to Surprise, and she's got the book up, she's annotating it, she's writing all over it and showing the student the screen. And I've got a video of part of this lesson to show you as well. So I'll show you that one now.
A bit bigger for you. Can you see the words, Ashan?
Yeah.
Yes? All right.
Yeah.
So, help me read. What's the name of the girl? Handa.
Hana.
Put.
Put.
How many fruits?
7.
Good. 7. Delicious.
Delicious fruit in
A. What is this called? What is she putting the fruits in?
I don't know.
Let's give it a go. Let's break it up. Sound it out.
Bit. Bit.
Start with the first sound. B. As. Good, good. Basket.
Basket.
Excellent. Basket.
4. Fruit.
For her.
Her.
Friend. friend's name is Akayo. Do you have a good friend?
Okay, I'll stop the video there, but you can see the student is really engaged in the story, in reading, and it's not really that different to if Heena was sitting next to the student in person reading with him, sorry. All right, now you can see on the pictures, these pictures here, Heena's writing and annotating over the document, and that's because she's put it into an interactive whiteboard software. We use Smart Notebook in the VNAP, but if you've got another interactive whiteboard software that you use, that you're familiar with, you could try that out. We find that it's much easier to make the lessons interactive if we transfer it onto that software. And then you can annotate it as you're working, and then you can send screenshots of the annotated work as a Word document or a PDF, a document that the student will be able to open on their device. I do know that Smart Notebook has some kind of a free offer, and if not, they've definitely got a 30-day free trial. So for the next 30 days after you register, you should be able to have access to using Smart Notebook if you're interested in having a look at that. And here's an example of a lesson that I taught using Smart Notebook, and I'm going to show you hopefully. Okay, so this is it in the program, in the software. So at the beginning of the lesson, it was just the picture of the kangaroo. And throughout the lesson with the student, they've told me different parts of the kangaroo, and I've done all the labeling myself. The student hasn't been using her device apart from to watch the video and to talk to me. So you can type, you can label, you can draw, you can color code, you can do all sorts of interactive things that are a bit trickier using some other programs. We'll go back now to the slideshow. Okay, so completing classwork. I would recommend sharing resources prior to your lessons with students, and hopefully you've got a way of sharing resources with your students, whether it might be emailing them, it might be using Google Classroom or a Google Drive, or on the WebEx Teams, Microsoft Teams, you can share documents, or even dropping off a paper pack to a student at the beginning of the week, or a student coming into school and picking something up once a week so that they've got some of the work prior to the lessons. And then depending on the level of your students, you can do the work, you can have the students do the work prior to the lesson and then talk to you about it in their lesson, or you can use the interactive whiteboard software and you can do the lesson together, do the work together. Students don't need to, I said this before, they don't need to do any playing around with their computer. They don't need to type, they don't need to do anything. I found that this distracts them from the language learning and ends up taking up lots of time, and then it's not a very productive use of anybody's time. If you've got a bigger class, we're really lucky in the VNAP that we're able to work with students one-on-one or in really small groups. But I am aware that at the moment, some people are working with much bigger groups. So I'd suggest possibly setting up some protocols or rules specific to an online lesson, just as you would at the beginning of the school year. Talk to your students about expectations or rules. Things change slightly online, and so there may be slightly different expectations. So tell students what's expected of them. I'd also recommend making lessons shorter. 50 minutes or an hour on an online lesson can be a really long time. But if you condense it into a 20-minute session and make the groups smaller, so do 3 20-minute sessions with smaller groups, then that might be a more interactive way for students to be involved. And also you can consider coming up with a set of emojis or something like that for students to use in the chat feature whilst you're doing a lesson. So if they've got a question, they don't find it too difficult to get in and ask their question, they can just put their little emoji in and then you can see and you can say, have you got a question? What would you like to ask? It might make it easier for students to have a bit of a voice in the classes. And here I've just got a possible lesson structure. Now there's so many different combinations and ways you could do lessons, but I was thinking if you had a large group of students, a possible way of managing it might be to pre-record your explanations or instructions for students and share that with students via your file sharing system. So you can record yourself in Zoom, certainly, and so there's a video of you and you can give your instructions to students. They might have some work to do and then schedule shorter online lessons, as I said before, with smaller groups of students. So 15 minutes of students really interacting and talking is going to be much more beneficial than an hour of the students in a bigger group sitting there listening, not having much of an opportunity to have a say. It makes them accountable, keeps them engaged, and it really also helps you as a teacher with your assessment. You're really able to gauge how students are going if the group's a lot smaller and they're able to interact. And you can give them positive or give them feedback on the work that they're doing. And then after their session, then they might have something else, some follow-up work that they can do to submit to you. Now, I'd just like to mention this resource for lower level students. We use this in the VNAP. We have a subscription to the PME collection, which is basically a lot of the PM readers, not all of them, but a lot of them online. So students can have a login, they can go on to choose a book at their level and they can read through it, and they are also given the opportunity to listen to it. They can listen to the whole page read out, or they can listen to a particular word if they're not sure of a particular word. And there's also a function to record. So if your student is able to manage the tech side of recording, and if their microphone and their device is able to do that, then they can record themselves reading the books and then listen back, which can be really valuable. So this is a really good resource that we've found very valuable in the VNAP. Okay, and lastly, I just wanted to show you this picture. Is of two students from the other side, either side of the state, working together, and it was a really valuable combination to be able to allow these two students who were quite isolated. They were the only EAL students in their school, but then they were able to meet up once a week and have a lesson together. And it was really valuable for the students, and it was a nice way to incorporate, make the lessons a bit more interactive. I think it's worth keeping in the back of our minds that even when we're back on site, we can use all what we're learning currently about remote learning to improve what we do when we're on site as well. There's opportunities that we can exploit from the virtual classroom, even when everything's back to normal and we're all teaching on site. So in summary, I've just made a quick summary of the top tips which I've spoken about throughout the presentation. Make lessons interactive, just as you would in a classroom. Switch between screen share and video view to maintain student engagement. Students only need to use their device to dial in, and then you do all the computer work after that, so that not the students, so they're not being distracted. Keep groups as small as possible. Share your resources prior to a lesson, and then that might be a video as well of you giving instructions or examples. Use interactive whiteboard software to teach your lessons online. Send students the notes that you made in the lesson for student reference. Talk to students about your expectations of them during online lessons. Establish a resource sharing system, whether it's hard copy packs, email, etc. And be creative. You've got lots of ideas as teachers, and they are transferable to online lessons and video conferencing. Here's a list of resources, and there's a more extensive list that will be provided after this session as well for you to access. So that's the end of the presentation. Hopefully I've managed to address some of your questions within that presentation. And we're going to move now to the Q&A part of the session. So what I'm going to do is just have a couple of minutes break. These will be the first 5 questions that we will answer, that the panel will answer. These have been submitted already, and we've grouped questions. And then after answering these 5 questions, we will look to answering some of the questions that you put up live on the Q&A function in Zoom. So I'm going to have a couple of minutes break. You can read through these questions, and that'll give you an opportunity to type in any questions that you have now into the Q&A function. Okay, so Panayiota and Voula and Heena, would you like to turn your microphones and videos on? There you are, Voula.
I've got mine, I think. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at the first question. Heena, would you like to address question number 1?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So how long before you set a break? So what we do is for younger children from prep to grade 2, we take a lesson for 30 minutes, and then we'd give them a 10 to 15 minute break. For older children, starting grades 3 to 6 and secondary students, 45 to 50 minute session and a 10 to 15 minute break as well. And during that break, students can do some stretches, go outside if it's a nice and beautiful day, get some sunshine, talk to their plants if they've got plants in the backyard, or just walk around the house, get a drink, go to the toilet. So younger children, 30-minute session, 10 to 15 minute break, and older children, 45 to 50 minute session, 10 to 15 minute break for them.
Okay, thanks, Heena. And Panayiota, would you like to address question 2?
Yes, I would, but I can't find my, I can't switch my video on. Can you see me?
The video on.
We can see you.
Oh, good, because I can't. All right. Okay, so what are good methods to engage students at home? while they're waiting to connect with devices and internet. So some of the ways that the schools have done it already is, of course, they've made packs and sent work home. Sometimes, of course, the parents may have to pick the packs up and then they return that, and so it could be corrected at school for the student. That's done weekly. Another way to engage, of course, you can use FaceTime. I've had to use FaceTime if there are there's no IT, but they do usually have the FaceTime. I have lessons on FaceTime and WhatsApp. And the way I do it there is I have to read the book, and sometimes I could show them a little picture of it, and then have a discussion, have a retell. Retelling demonstrates their understanding of what they've just read. Another one, of course, is you can just use a lot of visuals for the students. If there's nothing else, you can just maybe show a photo. You can focus on your phonics, focus on building vocabulary, sentence structures and grammar. All of this you can do even just on FaceTime or WhatsApp. I think one of the ways to keep them engaged, of course, is you know your students, and so working with them with a topic that they will they relate to and that they like. So if someone likes cars, use that, even a picture, and use that as your topic for the day. Visuals are really good. And I think this is perhaps the only way you do it. It's the same as using it in the classroom. You have a book, something that's of interest, and invite the students to talk and retell. And then, of course, that retell can be your assessment. Just jot down anecdotal notes, and that's a way that you can use, just a little bit of assessment. Okay, I hope I've answered that.
Great, thank you, Panayiota. And what about question number 3, Voula, about permission and privacy and cyber safety?
Okay, so there have to be protocols for video conferencing. You have to contact the school principal and make sure that it's okay to have video conferencing with your students. Then you contact the parents if it's okay. Send parent permission forms, which they can either acknowledge online or they can sign and send back. You have to have some clarity on expectations. You have to have some cyber safety lessons with students and make sure that the parents understand this. And to follow some child protection guidelines, we have to maintain professional boundaries. So we have to have relationships with our students and maintain a professional relationship with their parents and their carers by communicating and consulting with them in a timely and understandable and sensitive manner about any concerns they might have. And if we can't communicate with them directly, use Language Loop, the interpreter service. In the VNAP, our students are not unattended because their parents are at home. And when they're at school, they have a supervisor. So I know that some schools are concerned and they have talked about not being able to have video conferencing with their students. In that case, we would suggest that they use audio only. And some of our schools have said, some of our regional schools have said we are not to use video recordings. And so when we do a listening and speaking exercise, we do audio only.
Excellent, thank you, Voula. And how do we make sure everybody is engaged? Panayiota, did you want to answer this one?
Okay, again, I think this is very similar to the first one. I think here is a question where we need to know our student. We need to know what they're interested in, something that's relevant, something that is sequential, something that you have already done at school, you've introduced it, on you go. Make sure they're engaged. You can use, for example, today I read a simple book, Rami's New Kite. We did our reading, and then at the end of it, a few comprehension questions, so I could assess whether the student understood what was going on. And then at the end of it, we made a kite, but I invited the student to tell me what I had to do. So he was doing a procedural text. So by allowing him to teach me how to make a kite, he was totally engaged. So I think by sharing, it's really interactive, and by sharing that, he was very pleased. Here he is at grade 1, completing a procedural text on how to make a kite. So things like that, interacting, introducing interesting topics, and I think that's just the usual thing. Questioning, practice your decoding skills, practicing comprehension questions, and hopefully they're engaged.
And I think just to add to that, Panayiota, I think that's what you say about it being interactive is really important, and it can be interactive online. Just because it's online doesn't mean you can't do an interactive lesson. And also, if you have a large group of students, trying to make the lessons a bit shorter and smaller groups, I think that allows the students to be much more engaged and involved in the lesson as well.
At the moment, I have one class with 3 students, and there is another person there and myself, and they're also creating a text. And it's really amazing where you could say, okay, just for them to take in turns who's speaking now. It's like in the classroom when you're teaching lower primary, you might use a stuffed toy like a penguin or a little toy or a teddy bear, and the person who's speaking holds that. So it's very similar. You really need that sort of strategy when you're doing, over video conferencing, because it is important that every student does get their say, and that way they're also engaged. Everyone has a go, and everyone interacts with one another.
Just on those large groups, if you are teaching a large group of EAL students, you can use the breakout groups on Zoom and MS Teams. There's an advanced setting that you use on the browser for Zoom, and I have notes on that if anybody would like those, or send them to Carly and David after the PL. And you could have the students breaking up into those groups and have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to discuss 10 questions to find out something about their partner, and then come back to you and tell us what their partner has expressed to them, and to tell us what they found out about their partner. So you could break up into teams on Zoom and then come back and discuss what you found out.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Voula. And just looking at the last question here about facilitating listening comprehension and speaking practice using Zoom specifically, or video conferencing with screen sharing options. Panayiota, did you have an answer for this one?
Yes, I think all of these are linked, but for example, a good way again to facilitate listening comprehension, again, think of how you teach in a classroom. It's all transferable. I have a really nice thing that I do. Either I'll read a book, and I might even look at the 3 levels of comprehension, the literal, inferential, and the explanatory one. And that's very good. And you can also do it with a picture. So just using that, listening to comprehension and speaking practice, it's so interactive, and a lot of questions for the students to ask and for you to ask. It's a fantastic way of using a text or a picture to teach comprehension strategies, and of course the three, you know, the literal and the inferential and explanatory one. I just think I think sometimes we get confused with the technology and we forget we know how to do this in the classroom. And it's exactly the same way as you do it there. Of course, in a class, if you have a bigger group, I think it makes it even a richer conversation there with 4 or 5 students participating and interacting. So I think just, you know, stay calm, don't lose confidence, because it really is just transferring your skills, your teaching skills from one, you know, from one room to another, really. And yeah, I think that's probably all I can say for that.
All right, thanks, Panayiota. So that was a sort of snapshot of a lot of the questions that we had submitted before the session today. So hopefully we've addressed them, and I can see lots and lots of questions coming through on the Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing so you can see us. And I'm going to start by just answering one that came in about using Smart Notebook. And you can use Smart Notebook is a program or a software that you download onto your computer. And if you make your lessons on there, then when you share your screen, then if it's on your computer, then you will be able to use it with any of the video conferencing platforms that have a screen share option available. So hopefully that helps with that one. There's a few questions coming in about students without access to devices at home, and that's really tricky. I'm not sure if any of the other panel members have more of an answer. Panayiota, you sort of answered that one.
Yes, I sort of touched on it. I mean, really, even if they don't have access to a mobile phone for FaceTime and WhatsApp, I mean, really, I guess we need to realise with EAL, first and foremost, students need talking practice. Speaking and listening is the most important aspect of it. And you can do that on FaceTime and WhatsApp. And of course, then the other thing you have to fall back on is the pack, a work pack from school, where either the student picks it up. I think that's all we can do. If they don't have anything, you know, picking up that pack, and even conversing with the teacher at the school. Oh, well, you are the teachers at the school, we're not. But we do a lot of communicating with the teachers, asking them what they're looking at, and then we can use their scope and sequence and to help support them with our students. But you are their teachers, their regular teachers, I assume. And so by having your scope and sequence, you just follow that, maybe give them that thing, and then next week write a few comments or pictures to show that they've done it, and just sequence their learning each week and add to that. I mean, apart from hard copies, there's nothing really we can do. If they haven't got a mobile phone, that's really tough.
Okay, there's a question about what levels are the PME collection.
Oh.
Can I just mention that it's not our subscription. LeMerc provide the subscription, and they've been kind enough to allow us to use the collection because we don't have a physical library. The subjects that you find on there are fiction and non-fiction, but mostly fiction. There are a few things on volcanoes, earthquakes, a few other things. I don't know if you remember anything, Victoria or Panayiota or Heena.
That just ranges from a level, you know, from prep to grade 6. There's some very interesting books there that you can use.
And
I think
It does have a variety of books.
yes,
Students, it caters to all the students. So it can be used for students from prep up to year 10.
that's right.
yeah,
Yes, the
I
language.
often use it with the secondary students as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So next week when Jenny Peck is on talking
Yes.
about the resources, you can ask her about the PM collection. So,
And I can see that Jenny's listening. She's just said that the PME collection goes up to level 30.
30.
okay, great.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yes.
There was another question about using emojis on Zoom. Thank you, Julia. There is an emoji function on Zoom. If you just look at it, I can't remember exactly how to use it, but I know that most video conferencing platforms do have an option of students that have already, it's in part of the platform to use the emojis.
I've just noticed a question from Madeline, and she says, how do you support students to log in at the correct time and ensure attendance in the online lessons? Parents play a very important role here. So if you're in touch with the parents, they actually get the students to sit down, log them on, and they can be in and out of the room. They don't have to be sitting right next to the student. So talk to their parents and give them the time, work out a time with the parents, and then the parents can log the students in at the appointed time.
Yes, the storyline online is also a good resource. Jenny has also sent us a link to that, and there's some bilingual resources on that website.
Okay.
Just having a look through the questions.
Yes, I like them. You mentioned hand of surprise. Can you see that one? Can you recommend any other books that are on YouTube that we can use? That was actually a book that we smarted and used. There is a YouTube on that, but with that video with Heena, that was the actual book. It wasn't a YouTube. Yeah.
Stone Soup is also on YouTube, which is a really good little resource. There's 2 different versions. The one we have on the PM collection is slightly different to the actual, I think it's an Aesop story. I think the one on YouTube is more about sharing, whereas the PM collection is more about a prankster, you know, telling the old woman that he has this wonderful magical stone that's going to make a soup.
That's right. I actually remembered another one that I used on YouTube. It was called The Thirsty Crow.
Yes.
Now, I used that. I read the book to the student, and the student was Chinese. So I looked it up, and there was a Chinese version on YouTube. So it was just a fantastic way of, you know, acknowledging the other language and respecting that, and then working in English as well. That's a beauty. The Thirsty Crow, I think it's called. Yes, so that's another one.
So when you do use YouTube, I think it's important that you turn down the speed so that it doesn't go too fast, and the student can have time to read the text without you having to stop and start.
And may I just say, I was looking at an animal at one stage. It was on National Geographic, And I'm glad. I always view the YouTubes first. I always view everything online that I use. And fortunately I did, because this bird attacked the presenter, and he used some very choice words that little primary school children shouldn't use. So it was just amazing. It knocked him over. So yes, let's not forget to actually view them. Like a lot of the books that we use, read them first and see if they are appropriate. Please be very careful with any YouTube that you do use, or video. Otherwise we'll be caught out.
Sometimes getting rid of the presenter's voice is a good idea.
Yes, very good idea.
I've also can see a couple of questions about MEAs, or one in particular. MEAs online, I am currently working with a couple of students, and they are at their home. I'm at my home. The MEA is at her home. The MEA doesn't have the devices and the access to the video conferencing software, but the students do through their school device, their secondary students. And the MEA is actually calling in on FaceTime to the student's mobile phone. And then I'm dialing into the student using WebEx. So it's a complicated system, but surprisingly, it did work. So the student's quite a low level, so the MEA is doing a lot of explaining and a lot of helping in the lesson. But she can hear me, and we can't see each other, but the student and I can see each other, and the student and the MEA can see each other via FaceTime. And as it sounds complicated and convoluted, but it worked. So be creative about how you can connect with people.
Yes.
There's a question from Lucas Jordan about a secondary EAL setting. If online lessons are 30 to 50 minutes, how many online lessons are practical per day? At work, we do 6 a day sometimes. We sometimes have to, cut a few short, but we do 6 a day.
As a teacher. As a student, I wouldn't be recommending, particularly with EAL students, too much online contact. I think keeping them short and interactive, and then giving them work to follow up with, that then they can bring back to your next online lesson and explain to you and go through with you, so you can give them feedback and you can do your assessing in that way as well.
Can't see. I'm trying to see.
There's some great ideas about resources here.
Yes.
Yes. I can see someone's asked about, do you find teaching online a lot more intensive than in a classroom setting?
Yes.
It can be, yes. Because you don't have the dynamics of the students talking to each other, and it's a little bit different. It can be a really intense session, and I think that's important to remember, that it's intensive for us, it's probably also intensive for the students. So to keep those sessions shorter and not have really long sessions, because it's exhausting. And you're possibly exhausted by it because you're trying to navigate all of this new technology as well. And I suppose the students are to an extent as well. But I think keeping as much of the technology navigating to the teacher and allowing the students to just dial in and be present in the lesson and talk while you do all the annotating and the work, I think is the key to making the lesson really interactive.
I think there's an interesting question there that says, what doesn't work? What doesn't work online? I'd have to think about that.
Celebrity Heads doesn't work online. I tried that.
Guess who works online?
Guess who?
When I first started at VNAP, I was quite apprehensive, and I thought, my goodness, how is this going to work? And in actual fact, I think it is the intensity that you were talking about before. It is very intense, one-on-one that we teach, or just very small groups. But I think it does work. And then the practice, and then of course they can go off and practice that English. And you know, they have homework set that they could practice. Well, I don't know. That's interesting. Anyone else have something to say? What doesn't work? It's an interesting question. I know what doesn't work. If your lesson is not interesting to you and it's not engaging to you or motivating for yourself, don't do it, because it won't motivate anybody else. I think you really have to choose the topics that they like, of course, but also you have to be enthused as well. If you're going to present something like, you know, big and small and trains and planes, and really you have no interest in it, the student feels that, and feels it because it is such an intense way of teaching. So your lessons have to be quite, I think, engaging and motivating, really interesting for you, so you can carry that forth. Yeah.
Just a question here, anonymous attendee. ABC Education has some great resources.
Yes.
Also, podcasts for kids offer some great materials. Fuse has excellent resources. Schoolology, TeacherTube, BTN, all have great resources, and there's also TED for Kids for you know, listening practice that we can use.
And there's BTN just on the telly, that really good for the secondary mostly. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a question. It says, what is the best way for young students to access all the online work when their parents cannot understand the instructions? So that often happens to us, but we're lucky we've got MEAs who can speak different languages. We can use them for translation purposes. But if that doesn't happen, then we try and do the work when we have the sessions with the students. So that, because the parents can't help the students, they can't read out the work or assist their children. So we do the work online with the children.
There's another question about, you know, only having phones and WhatsApp or Messenger. I would try and get the work to the students beforehand. A lot of our VSL teachers do it this way. They have phone calls instead of video calls, and they just send the student the work either by email or in the post, and then they have a conversation online. Sorry, on the phone.
Voula, I've actually taken an image of the work I wanted the student to do. I was working on FaceTime, and I then took an image. When I typed it up, I made it sort of the size that I could actually take a photo, and I sent that on my phone as a message, as an image, and they were able to read that and do their homework with that. So many ways. Have to be, yes, innovative, I guess.
The question about the PM collection available to all schools, you'll have to ask Jenny Peck about that one. I know that cluster teachers can access that membership, but I don't know that, you know, city schools can access the membership.
It does. I do know also that the PME collection has a free trial as well. So I think it's 30 days. So it's worth having a look at for schools to register.
It's had some traffic this week that it's been down.
Has it? I've been using it. It's been working.
Okay. Great. Okay. All right, we've got 1 more minute. Who wants to answer a question? One secondary subject to support.
Day in a week.
What advice would you give to a secondary subject teacher to support EAL students?
Oh dear. But how long the lessons seems to come up quite a bit. How much, where is it? How much FaceTime, like screen time, would you have? Right.
Well, is supporting other subjects is what you normally do in class with the EAL students. So you'd find out where they're having the most difficulty and try and help them scaffolding the actual material that they've been given. Maybe do some practice reading of a text online, trying to sort of cover all of the areas of the textbook, or talking about a particular topic. There are also videos that you can get them to view online on courses on history and all sorts of topics that might help them understand a particular topic on a history or geography or a science. Many ways you can assist students to understand subjects or topics that they are doing in the mainstream.
Thanks for that. We've got to come to 5 o'clock, so we've finished all of the questions. But now I just wanted to mention that feel free to email us. I hope we've managed to address as many questions as we could. But if there are things that you still would like to know that you think that we might be able to support you with, then you can email us. And I have included our email addresses on the presentation that's available for you.
Yes, and hope we've covered everything for you.
Okay, well look, I would like to thank our presenters very, very much for your insightful comments and presentation today. I think it's been really, really interesting to hear what you've had to say and to hear about your expertise in this field. And I'm assuming that our participants have also benefited from your wonderful generosity in sharing your ideas. So a big thank you to our presenters today. I'd also like to, Victoria, Voula, Heena and Panayiota, thank you very much. Thanks also to the Victorian School of Languages and the Department of Education and Training for supporting their participation in this presentation today. It's been really fantastic. We've heard about protocols, rules, expectations around online interactions, along with many tips and strategies for interacting with learners. And I've certainly found things that I can take away from the session. Thank you to the participants. We had over 200 people, which is fantastic. The questions in the Q&A were really, really insightful, and I think we might try and gather some of those anonymously and use them as a resource to provide further information for teachers around the sorts of things that teachers are needing to know. So they were really very many and very varied. And as Victoria said earlier, what we learned from the virtual classroom may be useful for when we're back on site. So this is really valuable information. Just a reminder that the PowerPoint from this session and the recording will be available on the VicTESOL website in the next few days, so please keep an eye on that. There's also an evaluation that will be sent to you on email. We ask you to please fill that in. That's really helpful for us to get feedback on the presentation today. And finally, thank you everyone for your participation and contributing to this discussion and helping us to make our way ahead in this very challenging time. So on that note, a big round of applause for our presenters and thank you.
Thank you, Shem.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Victoria.